Anyway, why don't we move on? Microsoft has been catching. Okay, back to things that you should be mad about. Here's a legitimate channel for that energy.
This could take some action.
Microsoft has suddenly closed
It's not an ad.
3 studios that it acquired alongside Bethesda, including Tango Gameworks, the developer of the award-winning and widely praised Hi-Fi Rush, Arkane. Hi-Fi Rush. How do I pronounce Austin?
I think that's supposed to be Austin.
Oh, that makes way more sense. Arkane Austin, developer of Prey and Redfall, was another loss, meaning that development of Redfall...
It's Arkane Studios in Austin, Texas.
...is effectively over, and its promised DLC has been canceled. Purchasers of the Hero Pass that promised access to this future DLC will instead receive a credit of unknown value.
Neat.
And the studio head at Arkane Austin's sister studio, Arkane Lyon, called the closure a gut stab. Fans, meanwhile, have been reverse review bombing Hi-Fi Rush with positive reviews in a show of support. According to reporting from Bloomberg, even more Microsoft studios are likely to close in the near future due to a widespread cost-cutting initiative.
There's other reasons as well. Maybe we'll get into them here. I'm not sure.
During a Bloomberg event, Xbox President Sarah Bond gave a non-answer to the question of whether launching a surprise hit game should protect a developer from being shut down, as the camera cut to a wide shot showing a very interesting graph of Xbox's year-over-year growth. Here comes our very interesting graph.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Are you allowed to call it growth? I guess growth could be a negative number. That makes sense.
Xbox Game Studios head Matt Booty also inflamed the controversy when it was reported that he told employees during an internal meeting a day after the closures that Xbox needed smaller games that give us prestige and awards, which is...
The defense that I've heard around that...
Yes.
Is that Hi-Fi Rush was actually a surprisingly large game in the sense of the cost of development, studio size, and stuff like that. But I would still argue that it outproceeded expectation.
I mean, when we talk about big games these days, we're talking about, quadruple A games. In my mind, honestly though, when you tell me a big game these days,
you try to compare budgets of it. So
yeah, I'm sitting here going, okay, well, is it Cyberpunk? Is it GTA 6? What's a big game? So when you say smaller games, he didn't even say smaller games that give us prestige and awards.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the size of what was it? Was it Arkane Austin? No, Tango Gameworks. I don't know anything about the size of that, so I can't really compare it. And the whole AAA nomenclature is weird these days anyways, because what does it even mean anymore? Yeah, I heard, I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard that the original naming for that came from the finance industry, and it was supposed to essentially define games that were a safe investment because they were leaning on IPs that people knew would sell and stuff like that. And that's just not what the AAA industry is anymore.
Here's my question. If they're so strapped for cash, could they have just not bought Bethesda?
Bought a bunch of studios? Yeah, I wonder
not even
how
a bunch of studios. Could they have just not bought Bethesda specifically?
I wonder how much of this is specifically the failure of Starfield.
That's an interesting question.
I talked about this on the WAN show, I don't know how long ago, but I had a discussion topic. I don't know how we got onto this, but I talked about how I think there were some quotes from the director of publishing from Larian or something in there as well. But I talked about how one of the big problems with these subscription services is that the companies running the subscription services are just going to want games that sell the subscription service.
Yep, and they're going to have their own internal metrics, which probably have deeply flawed aspects of them. They're not going to be perfect.
Yep. So they'll do it data-based on whatever, not data-based as in a database.
Yeah, but based on data. Data-driven decision-making.
There we go, yeah. They'll do that, but then what if the data's junk? And I suspect a lot of that data is going to lead them to massive titles that bring in all of the people instead of these small games that, like, someone might subscribe to the service because they're like, I want to play the new Halo or whatever. Sure. But what they actually spend all their time playing, because Halo sucks now, is stuff like Hi-Fi Rush or whatever else. But if they, on their exiting survey and they're the first game they play when they sign up, if those aren't these smaller titles, it might not bring light to them. And if that makes them think, they should be able to see the
playtime though.
Yeah, but if you have a bunch of playtime, I don't know. It totally depends on how they're measuring that data. It also
is. I guarantee you. Look, I don't work at Microsoft. I don't work within the Xbox team, but I guarantee you that there's an element of this that's political as well. Because any time you just have a bucket of money, someone is going to decide what to do with that money. If all of these games were selling on their own individual merit, generating their own revenue, then it would be directly attributable right back to the team that worked on it. Whereas if all of these games are minor contributors to a gigantic bucket of money called Game Pass revenue that someone or someone's is in charge of divvying up, kind of going, okay, so reinvestment wise, this is going to go into what we think is a good bet over here, and this is going to go into what we think is a good bet over here. Just because you made something great last time that contributed a whole bunch of subscribers, a whole bunch of playtime, doesn't necessarily mean that you will be divvied anything.
Yeah.
So it's actually the complete. And what's funny is,
because what if they don't believe in your vision for your next proposed project?
Then instead of you just automatically having the money for it anyway, because your last project did really well, you could just be rug pulled and
everything's gone.
And what's funny about this is I remember us having conversations about how subscription services could be a savior for smaller game developers. They could have.
And it sort of was for a little bit.
And they could have been, because this idea that instead of feast and famine, where you launch your game, you get a whole bunch of revenue, you squirrel it away like a squirrel saving nuts. Okay, you squirrel it away, and then you kind of ration it out until you can get your next game launched. That wasn't sustainable, right? And so the idea that you could just have a little bit of consistent revenue trickling in on a more regular basis by contributing to this pool of games that people can play, games Netflix style, it all seemed like a pretty happy idea.
Here's another part of the problem. So I don't think this was in the notes, and if I click on the fortune.com article to try to actually get the whole thing, there's a giant ad that I can't get past to pay money to Fortune. So I'm just going to read off of the Google search result for it. But it says, speaking about the closures more broadly, Booty said that the company's studios had been spread too thin, like peanut butter on bread, which I thought was a really weird analogy for spread too thin, but sure. And that leaders across the division had felt understaffed, and they decided to close these studios to free up resources elsewhere. So they bought all these things,
right?
Didn't have the
plan,
high level leadership to manage all these sub studios now, and then we're just like, and closed it. What a waste. Like there's like Embracer Group just like bought a bunch of stuff and then closed them, and Microsoft just bought a bunch of stuff and closed them. Like, this isn't going to make people get interested in your other garbage games that you're releasing. It's just going to create more people buying other stuff unrelated to you. Like, if we look at a lot of the really big successes as to late, they have not been big Microsoft titles.
What about Halo Infinite?
It's just not working. Like, the buy them and close them model is not going to be effective. I pretty much guarantee.
And I gotta kind of wonder, right? Like bean counters, If your bean counting calculation goes, okay, this bean costs $1 billion. Okay, so you buy it for $1 billion.
Nice.
And then you basically go, okay,
bean. It's a solid bean right there.
Okay. Let's throw away this bean.
I could fit so much fiber in that bean.
Yeah. What's your plan? Like, how did that make it past the, that old meme format where the guy gets like hucked out of the window of the boardroom? Like, how
did it make it past that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually don't get it. And to be clear, it's not like as a company, we've never overextended ourselves and been in a position where, having twice as many people is actually less efficient, right? Like it's not like we aren't at a size where I get that.
Growth has pains.
But you don't have to buy things.
And they closed it so fast. They didn't buy Bethesda that long ago.
No.
Like it's very quickly.
No.
My goodness. Oh man.
But throwing away the bean is a tax write-off. Drop table employees in float plane chat, you're banned. I'm kidding. You're not banned.
I do wonder how much of this is just like minor stock manipulation or like trying to appease stockholders at all. Like, because if they have all these studios, like, is it better from a stockholder's perspective or someone potentially purchasing a stock? This is stuff I am not good at, don't know a lot about. So just big warning before people get pissed off. From that perspective, is it better for them to just focus on future revenue than care about what's in the bank right now? And I think yes, right? So they can spend fairly recklessly to like buy studios as long as they're sharpening the sword for the future. Is that how the like capitalist stock market perspective goes?
So what you want, if you are an acquisition company, which at a certain point
they are,
every company is. You're essentially just, when's the last time Microsoft invented anything? And you can basically say that about any gigantic multi-hundreds of billions of dollars company. Some of them do.
They just buy small companies.
They do very real research and development, but a lot of the time they're out there acquiring.
They buy OpenAI.
They're acquiring. So at a certain level, pretty much every company is an acquisition company. So they take capital from shareholders, from investors, and they use that capital to buy something that has recurring revenue. Then they basically just need to maintain whatever their target balance of revenue to operational expenses is. And if they don't, then their share price crashes, their creditworthiness tanks, and they are in enormous trouble because they have a bunch of debt, right? Because they needed that investment in order to make those acquisitions.
Yeah.
So it becomes this wheel that they have to keep running on to constantly show a really high operating income, which is that operating revenue minus operational expenses calculation. And so what they might do is buy something, and then if it doesn't immediately spin the money machine fast enough by shedding it, well, a penny saved is a penny earned.
Yeah.
And from an investor standpoint, the minor details, like the amount of money that they had to spend to reach that number on a quarter by quarter basis, doesn't really matter as long as they find some other thing to acquire that like does more better, or some other thing that does whatever. It's just effectively cost of doing business. There is no human element to any of this. And that's why you see decisions like this being made. That's why you see this level of recklessness, or callousness, I guess, is probably the better word. The example of Tesla just laying off their supercharging. Does that
change though? Because they bought Bethesda for like around 10% of just the cash on hand that they had. So I don't know. I mean, it was probably still done as some debt purchase because whatever, but.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that immediate loss on Bethesda doesn't really matter as long as they maintain that ratio.
This is what I was trying. This was also the point that I was effectively trying to make.
I see.
Like, does spending the money effectively not matter? And then they try to sharpen the sword afterwards. So like the purchase of studios from these large companies means honestly next to nothing.
Yeah. Like it's, and they can play an extremely long game as long as they don't run out of capital. Like I think I've talked about this before, but one of my friends has an independently owned veterinary practice. And she was talking to me about the nightmare that it was to be bidding on the veterinary practice that she worked at. So she worked there. She started as an employee and is now the owner. But her journey there was arduous. And as she was reaching the final stages of her negotiation to purchase the veterinary practice, the problem was that she was bidding against a large, you could call them a veterinary company, but remember what I just said, any company, once it's large enough, is just an acquisition company. So what they really are an acquisition and holding company that happens to focus on investments into veterinary practices because it's a space that they are deeply invested in, which can come with strategic advantages, which I'll get to in a second. And so the problem that she had was typically you would value a business on some multiple of their earnings before something, I forget, whatever. It's called EBITDA. So, let's say 3 to 5x for a business that's not expected to experience any kind of explosive growth. And what that essentially means is, let's say that number was $10 million. I would expect to buy your veterinary practice that makes $2 million a year. I would expect to buy it for somewhere between $6 and $10 million. And the idea is that if I continue to run it well, I will make back my $6 to $10 million in 3 to 5 years. And if it's a business that's expected to grow, then you would expect a higher multiplier, because if I run it competently, well, it should grow and I should make my money back in an even shorter period of time. And you can see much, much higher EBITDAs in fields like tech, where they're expecting this company to explosively grow in the next 2 years to the point where they might get that return in, 18 months, right? Well, a veterinary practice isn't like that. They're
it's probably going to be pretty consistent.
You might see steady growth,
unless everyone buys pets because of COVID or something like that. That there's no way you can see it coming.
But there's only so many operating rooms. There's only so many dogs you can cut open at a time, And so there's kind of limits.
Sad but true.
Yes, there's kind of limits to how much it can grow.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in the 3 to 4 to 5x range is probably reasonable for something like that. But what she was up against was a company that was bidding about double that, and she's looking at it going, "This makes no real sense." Like the cost, I have to have debt in order to. I don't have that kind of money sitting in the bank. It's millions of dollars. Even a vet, right? Like they don't have millions of dollars of cash in the bank. It doesn't work like that. Like you have to take on debt in order to make an acquisition like that. And so how does this make any sense? The amount of interest I'm going to be paying. Right. So, but she's up against a group that is playing such a long game.
They just don't even care.
They don't care.
They want
about the
effectively
immediate
monopolistic
return.
ownership of all the veterinary practices in the general areas that they're operating in.
They're playing such a long game, and their shareholders don't care about that big hit to the balance sheet this quarter. What they care about is the money machine.
What's the path? Churning
out consistent income. And then once there's nothing else to acquire, well, they still have to have that go up. So what they do is, well, now that they control all the veterinary practices in the Vancouver area, they jack up the prices. And that's the end game. It destroys everything. And the reality of it is that regulators are not going to get involved in community veterinary practices, because it's not a monopoly in the strictest sense of the word. It's anti-competitive, sure, but I mean, realistically, when there are so much bigger battles to fight, like the $400 Band-Aid that might end up on your invoice at a hospital, for example. What? So like your dog's broken leg cost you more because some company owns all the vet legs? I'm sorry, I don't have time for this.
Like, it's something that would be nice if they pursued, and I'm happy that these days they do seem to be doing roughly anything. But yeah. there might be bigger fish.
So so basically, yeah, that's the long and short of it. They don't care because they don't care, because it just doesn't matter to them, which really sucks. So the good news for my friend who owns the practice is that Dr. Smith is a good guy, one of those people who actually puts people above money, and took the human offer.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's actually really good to know.
Yeah. So if you guys are ever need help with
don't assume most people are going to do that either.
No, most
people would take the big offer.
And you can tell yourself all day. You can tell yourself all day and night, I would take it. I would take the human offer.
And then the offer's on the table.
And then there's literally millions of dollars at stake. It's in front of you. The document is there. All you have to do is sign it.
Pretty much no one's going to know that you did this.
Most people will sign it.
Yep.
But it was pretty cool. So Dr. Smith, super cool.
Good job,
and
Dr. Smith.
Shout out my friend Cindy from Fraser Heights Animal Hospital. Really good person. Yeah, she's super cool. So if you guys, I don't think they don't do birds, unfortunately, for Luke.
Yeah.
They specialize in dogs and cats. But
our vet is actually they're very nice people. They're just really far away. That's the main annoying part.